Jadi kemungkinan itu buzzer berbayar untuk menyudah.
Karena orang Rohingya jorok, makanya kita harus ngebuang mereka.
And that's why the case we brought in Jakarta is so important.
Seriously, Yasmin, I thought Aung San Suu Kyi is the hope that Myanmar needed.
Yasmin is the hope. Yasmin is the hope.
No.
That's okay, Chris.
From being a victim to being a survivor. That's really important.
Indonesia ini kan presiden Dewan HAM PBB. Buktinya apa? Nah ini.
Do you guys agree if I say that Myanmar has the same urgency as Gaza? Oke, ketemu lagi di Learning by Talking. Ini sebenarnya episode yang tidak disangka-sangka nih. Belum ada planning buat talking lagi sebenarnya. Jadi backgroundnya dikit. Waktu itu Bang Ferry ngechat gua bilang ada temen nih aktivis dari London ya Bang ya. Dari London yang biasa membahas isu-isu Myanmar mau ke Indonesia, mau podcast gak. Nah saya tuh sebenarnya cukup sering ngomongin Myanmar. Iya. Jadi kayak pas ditawarin itu kayak bisa nih karena terakhir bahas Myanmar ternyata 2023. Saya dari situ belum bahas lagi, kita nggak tahu update-nya kayak apa kan. Jadi ya langsung kita iakan saja. Jadi di sini kita punya Chris Ganes from London and Yasmin Ula. Menariknya adalah dari tadi gue ngomong sama Yasmin bahasa Indonesia. I thought she is Indonesian. You're Rohingya?
I'm fully Rohingya.
Fully Rohingya?
Yeah, you can test my DNA.
But you move here, right?
I actually was born in Arakan, in Rakhine State.
Yeah, Arakan State.
But I was displaced during many waves of the Rohingya genocide in 1995. And I was displaced to Thailand. And I was a refugee there for 16 years.
Okay.
I've never been in Jakarta as a refugee, but I come here often to do activism.
So you're basically in Thailand now? You live in Thailand?
I was for 16 years. Now I live in Canada.
Pom Shikoi.
ชื่อคอย
คุณพูดภาษาไทยได้ไหม
พูดได้ค่ะพูดได้
That was amazing.
ผมพูดภาษาไทยนิดหน่อย
ได้นิดหน่อย
ใช่
เก่งแล้ว
ใช่
Sorry not to exclude the two. That's so cool.
Jadi Bang, sebenarnya apa yang sedang dilakukan nih? Kenapa ada Yasmin tiba-tiba ke Indonesia, Chris tiba-tiba ke Indonesia? Sebelum kita ke Chris nih ya.
Sebenarnya saya dan Chris itu sudah berjuang soal isu Myanmar cukup lama. Terutama ketika kami berupaya mengusahakan betul ya bahwa agar Indonesia bisa menerima laporan atas kejahatan kemanusiaan di Myanmar dengan cara mengajukan perkara ke Mahkamah Konstitusi. Di Undang-Undang Pengadilan HAM itu pasal 5-nya ada kalimat kurang lebih begini, bahwa setiap kejahatan hak asasi manusia di luar teritorial Indonesia itu dapat diadili di pengadilan Indonesia yang pelakunya oleh warga negara Indonesia. Yang terbayang di kepala kami, kalau yang pelakunya oleh warga negara Indonesia itu dihapus, maka berlaku azas universal jurisdiction, di mana seluruh kejahatan di luar teritorial Indonesia bisa dihukum di Indonesia asal yang oleh warga negara Indonesia itu dihapus. Kita berjuang di MK sama Chris, sama berbagai pakar dunia ya, dari Amerika, dari Singapura, dari London, dari Spanyol gitu ya, menjelaskan bahwa azas universal ini penting untuk melindungi hak asasi manusia agar negara-negara di dunia pakai itu, sehingga negara-negara ini tidak jadi safe haven-nya para pelaku kejahatan. Sering ke Indonesia kan, Bali terutama ya. Nah oleh karena itu kalau itu dihapus cocok tuh. MK waktu itu memutuskan tahun 2006 ya, sekarang 2024 ya, sekitar itu memutuskan bahwa ide kalian ini bagus. Kalian ini kurang lebihnya bahasa anak mudanya ya, pinter nih kalian nih, terima kasih atas upaya-upaya kalian, terutama peduli dengan kemanusiaan. Tapi kata Mahkamah Konstitusi, Ini agak sulit kita terapkan sekarang karena ada isu diplomasi, penghormatan relasi negara, dan ada isu ekonomi. Memang kita agak terkejut, sejak kapan ini bicara isu ekonomi? Karena di sidang kami nggak pernah bicara isu ekonomi. Ternyata memang ada bisnis di antara dua negara yang mereka mau lindungi. Jadi sekarang jangan. Tiba-tiba lahir KUHP baru Di KUHP baru itu pasal 5, pasal 6, pasal 7, pasal 8, pasal 9 bicara soal azas universal jurisdiction itu. Jadi pelaku kejahatan HAM di luar wilayah Indonesia bisa disidang di Indonesia dan dihukum dalam hukum Indonesia. Nah, kita teringat Myanmar juntanya membunuh orang secara brutal. Kalau saya dengar cerita dan teman-teman itu, bahkan dengan pesawat bagai itu ditembakin itu luar biasa pembunuhannya. Dan angkanya luar biasa besar gitu ya. Bahkan tidak ada angka pasti untuk menjelaskan korban. Jadi ini perbuatan tidak beradab dan sebagai warga dunia kita nggak bisa membiarin. Jadi itunya yang membuat Chris dan Yasmin datang untuk melaporkan kejahatan itu ke Kejaksaan Agung pagi ini.
Berarti sudah dari sebelum kesini
Sudah kesini.
Sudah resmi dilaporkan.
Sudah resmi dilaporkan. Diterima oleh Kapus Penkum Kepala Pusat Penerangan Hukum dari Kejaksaan Agung bersama Direktur Hak Asasi Manusia. Nah, setelah ini kita bahkan berencana untuk bertemu Jaksa Agung dengan memberikan pertimbangan. Ayo Pak Jaksa Agung, Indonesia itu kan sudah menganut azas universal jurisdiction, dan jangan lupa Indonesia itu adalah Presiden Dewan Hak Asasi Manusia PBB. Jadi buktikan sesuatu dong dengan ini ya gitu.
Berarti dilaporkan atas nama ini Min Aung Hlaing.
Iya, Min Aung Hlaing.
Diktatornya kan?
Yes. Kan dia barusan terpilih jadi presiden ya. Kita laporin.
So Chris, I've talked a lot about Myanmar after the coup. Since 2021 until the last time I talk about Myanmar is 2023.
Wow. Okay.
About the three Brotherhood Alliance. Yeah. That is the last time my video talk about Myanmar.
Wow. So a lot of bad things have happened since then.
Nah, that's what I want to ask.
Okay. So
what is the condition now in Myanmar?
Okay. So the whole conflict landscape has changed quite dramatically.
Okay.
And it's dramatically changed against civilian life. And what we've seen is an exponential proliferation of what we call atrocity crimes. So these are crimes which are violations of the Rome Statute, which is the founding body of the International Criminal Court. They are actions which violate the Genocide Convention, the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, and they are actions which violate the UNCAT, the United Nations Convention Against Torture. There are a whole series of international laws which some governments, including Indonesia, including in fact Myanmar, Myanmar signed up to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which obliges a government to give certain rights, including the right of life, to children, which Rohingya children are routinely denied the right of life. So we look at the conflict landscape, we in MAP look at the conflict landscape in Myanmar through the lens of criminality, of crimes which are internationally defined. And the thing about that is once you start looking at conflict through the lens of crimes, you have an instant cutting edge into dealing with those things. So, for example, we've seen a huge proliferation of airstrikes. So as the Three Brotherhood Alliance made its advances on the battlefield, the response of the junta was not to send in ground forces and have a conventional battle. Because they have a huge advantage in terms of air power, they would send in fighter jets, they would use artillery to blow up from the sky IDP centers for internally displaced people, hospitals. On the 10th of January this year in Rakhine State, where Yasmin comes from, World Human Rights Day, the 10th of December, they blew up a hospital in a place called Rak-U. They killed 33 people, 17 men, 16 women, hospital workers, patients in the hospital. Hospitals are protected by international humanitarian law. So I immediately thought, that is something we can bring to the attention of the authorities in places where we bring cases. So indiscriminate and widespread attacks on civilians, that's defined under these big international law conventions. Imposing on a population conditions of life intended to exterminate or kill off the group in whole or in part. That's language from the Genocide Convention. That's exactly what's happening to Yasmin and her communities and her people. So what we've seen is this explosion, literally, sadly, an explosion of international crimes. More civilians have been killed in Myanmar last year than the previous year. The graph is going up and up and up. So in all of these categories of crimes, since 2023, we've seen a huge explosion. And that's why the case we brought in Jakarta is so important, because it says, okay, folks, everyone's got their view about this or that. We are going to bring a criminal file for genocide and crimes against humanity, and we're doing it because the new penal code in Indonesia specifically permits cases to be brought under the principle of universal jurisdiction. That principle says it doesn't matter whether the perpetrator is Indonesian or whether the victim is Indonesian. It doesn't matter if the crime didn't take place in Indonesia. There is still an obligation on the Indonesian government to take action against those crimes. So we've brought crimes which absolutely fit what's going on inside Myanmar, but what's actually defined by the Indonesian Penal Code. So that's why we hope, and I just want to be very clear to your listeners, what happened today in Jakarta was a piece of Indonesian history. For the first time since your penal code came into force, a case under the principle of universal jurisdiction has been received by the prosecutor's office. That is a moment which, because of people like Yasmin who have fought for their rights, who fought against criminality, they have, on behalf of the Rohingya people, produced a piece of legal history within Indonesia.
Oke. Tapi emang sebelumnya belum pernah dari Myanmar melaporkan lewat negara lain kayak gini?
Belum pernah. Karena tadi dia cerita soal statu Roma, itu membuat Indonesia tidak bisa jadi negara pihak, Myanmar tidak bisa jadi negara pihak di dalam pengadilan internasional yang ada di Den Haag. Nah, itu sebabnya ini sesuatu yang luar biasa karena memang tidak pernah dilakukan sebelumnya.
Can I just say there's a very beautiful concept from here. It makes me want to cry when I talk about it. There are some crimes which are so serious and so grave, they're considered to be committed against all of us, against the whole human family, the so-called crimes against humanity. And these crimes which are being committed by the junta, the Burmese, the military in Myanmar, they are committed against all of us. That's the concept. And if you think about it, there's something very beautiful. If I attack you, I'm attacking all of humanity. And therefore, governments have an obligation because it's a crime against everybody. And so we must get away from this idea that there's this little marginalized people in this weird place called Rakhine. It's a crime against all of us. The crime's being committed against Yasmin and her community. It's a crime against humanity, and it's called that for a purpose.
That is also Islamic perspective.
Yes.
Against all humanity.
And actually, Yasmin, you should explain, there are other Islamic concepts which she has brought to Indonesia.
I think that people kind of misconstrue or misunderstand, this idea that Islam is a religion of peace. But peace is not an inertia or a state. It's actually an action. And that comes about with all of us holding on to this core principle of our religion, which is accountability. We one day will die and we'll stand in front of God and tell him or be questioned what we've done in this life. And if we've harmed even a single human being in a very minute way, we will be answerable to that person and God. And so crimes against humanity, war crimes, or genocide cannot be a thing where we think, oh, it's outside of my border. I don't need to care about that. Which is sometimes a very, very common excuse or answers that I hear from a lot of people across Southeast Asia, not just Indonesian. And it's a very, very interesting response towards, you know, the genocide that happens right next door. When Malaysians or Indonesians tell me this, I often think back to this concept of accountability within our religion, a beautiful religion that we have, that how come we forget that, you know, the very first thing that was outlawed was actually the killing of baby girls in the prophetic traditions. And so many baby girls in the Rohingya community have been killed over and over and over again. And how come, you know, people here who are devoutly Muslims, who go to pray 5 times a day, who fast during the month of Ramadan, who pay zakat, who takes care of their neighbor, forget that there's also, you know, the neighbor here within ASEAN that has been completely marginalized. Our community has been desecrated over and over again through many, many years. And to this day, you know, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and so many countries in ASEAN continue to trade with our perpetrators in billions of dollars. And how is that just or accountable in any way, shape, or form? That is, you know, something that we really need to reflect as, you know, Muslim community, but also beyond. Because again, like, peace cannot be reached without just hush hush. Let's not talk about genocide, or let's just be friends and let's forget about victims. It's only through accountability. It's only through, actually, maybe we need to put some of these, you know, violent criminals into prison and rehabilitate victims or survivors in order for us to get to peace.
And one of the things, if I might just butt in, that Yasmin has talked about, is that not only are they trading in billions with the Burmese dictator has just declared himself the president in the tradition of dictators, just declaring themselves the ruler of this land. And the concern is that this is going to be normalized. ASEAN has taken a position. China, of course, you know, has said that they recognize this sham election. You know, the party that just won, the USDP, in the last election, November 2020, they won less than 6% of the vote. Miraculously, they just won a landslide after years of, you know, a reign of terror on their own people. So it was clearly a fixed election. It didn't happen in huge areas of Myanmar, and yet this man, who's been committing genocide in his military fatigues, has just taken off his military fatigues, put on a civilian uniform, and expected everybody to salute him, you know, as this great civilian leader. So let's be clear, ASEAN must not fall back under pressure from China into recognizing this man as the civilian. No, he is a genocidal military dictator, and he will forever be that. And that is why there has to be accountability, because the accountability cuts against this false narrative.
But do you think why the world stopped recognizing about Myanmar?
Why did the world? Because of trade, because of rare minerals, because of diplomatic issues. You know, it's so much easier. If you look at the ASEAN Charter, it's so much easier for ASEAN to say, no, we want to get on with everyone. What about the right to development? We're a poor part of the world. We need this. But actually, when you talk to victims and survivors of genocide, what they want is justice and accountability. You know, that view of ASEAN is a very top-down view. And actually, if this region is going to function, and if governments are going to listen to civil society, which is driving this agenda, you have to define national concepts and national objectives in terms of what people want. You know, if there's a big disjunct between what the people want and what the state and people up here want, there's always going to be violence, there's going to be conflict, there's going to be discrimination, there's going to be hate. All of these things, which are a plague on society, will thrive unless the ASEAN region listens to what's happening at the grassroots.
Politik Indonesia dengan Myanmar itu politik tarik ulur juga, Koi. Bisnis jalan, tetapi di titik tertentu mereka mempertanyakan kredibilitas pemerintahan. Misalnya pemilu terakhir kemarin yang Myong Lai jadi presiden, Indonesia tuh menolak pemilu itu, menolak mempertanyakan pemilu itu, tetapi bisnis jalan. Nah, ini yang jadi pertanyaan, kenapa di soal pemilu bisa dipermasalahkan oleh Indonesia, tapi nyawa orang sebanyak itu, anak-anak, ibu-ibu yang kemudian dibunuh, dibantai dengan cara-cara tidak benar, malah Indonesia tidak menunjukkan sikapnya. Jadi memang agak ada tarik ulur ya supaya politik dagang jalan terus gitu ya. Nah itu yang kemudian kita pertanyakan, kenapa kita sangat peduli dengan Palestina, tapi dengan Myanmar yang juga sangat lebih dekat kan. Kalau di konsep Islam kan tetangga dulu ditolong, bukan orang di luar. Jadi itu yang menurutku yang menjadi hal yang perlu dipertanyakan dari sikap Indonesia.
Makanya tadi saya juga nanya, kenapa ya orang-orang kok udah lupa nih kesannya kan?
Kesannya
Dunia
betul.
Kayak lupa tentang Myanmar, tapi kita nggak tahu update-nya. Ternyata di pas Chris bilang malah tambah parah bukan membaik.
Bukan membaik. Kalau Indonesia punya Hussein Gaza, mestinya Indonesia punya Hussein Myanmar juga atau Hussein Rakin.
Hussein Yangon.
Itu harus dipertimbangkan.
Iya benar.
Kepedulian itu perlu.
Iya. Oke, Yasmin.
Yes.
This is my first time talk to
A Rohingya.
And a genocide survivor.
Iya.
There is a genocide survivor. Can you tell us more about what happened in Arakan during your time there, or maybe many years after that?
I was 3 when I left the country.
Okay.
But I have been informed throughout my entire life what happens to our people, and it becomes a deep core part of my life where I'm constantly worried for my families. Majority of my families are still back in Myanmar. They somehow manage to live through this entire, genocidal oppression for the past 84 years, since 1942. And what happened was during the 1988, post-1998 uprising within Burma, Myanmar, which Rohingya have participated, there was a crackdown by the military junta, and the Rohingya were targeted heavily. And that has brought about the waves of genocide in the 90s up until around 1995, which was the year that my mother made the toughest decision in her life to actually leave. Because she does not want my life to repeat the cycle that she has to live through. And that means women in the Rohingya community are constantly living in fear of being raped. That my grandmother, back in the day when the military raids were happening so much, she and her sister-in-law would put coal on her face to just appear uglier so that the military would not rape us. That was my grandmother's generation. My mother decided she did not want me to live that life, and she took me as a baby, a 3-year-old. She was a young woman herself, on board a military ship, because that was the only thing that actually would take us from Sittwe, the capital of Arakan or Rakhine State, all the way to Yangon, which used to be our capital city. And that's how we actually got through so many different transportation mode, cars, walking, hiking through the jungles, getting to northern parts of Chiang Mai, of Thailand. Sorry, it was Mae Hong Son first, and then we moved around because, of course, we were fleeing from the police, and it's just a regular part of being a displaced person because, the police would be after you because you don't have the status, you don't have the protection of a state, because when your state fails to protect you, another state will not protect you. And I think that's something that we're trying to change here in Indonesia, in Jakarta, for this case specifically, to showcase that there is goodwill to go around, and the Rohingya does not have to suffer in silence, that there is another state that is willing to step up. Just to go back to what the conditions look like nowadays, we're dealing with policies and practices that are actually discriminating the Rohingya, but also goes beyond that aspect. We are forced into labor or slavery, where women and men actually are constantly living in fear of being raped and sexually violated. We don't have access to education whatsoever, no access to health care. There are arbitrary lines that are drawn every day in different parts of our villages to allow us to basically ban us from crossing to a certain resources or to get to a place. If we violate those things that are arbitrarily written or imposed, we're automatically jailed for 2 years with no trial. And constantly people are hanged in those prisons, or they're tortured, or they're raped, or they're violated in many other gruesome ways. We live in an apartheid-like condition in Arakan because Rakhine people at some point prior to the coup were actually favored by the military junta. And this is the divide and conquer game that they've done really, really well. So the Rohingya were not given any resources, while all the resources were poured into the Rakhine community. And that's how we, to this day, live in the worst kind of poverty and are also starved because the military junta and now the Arakan army, the resistance group for the Rakhine people, are also now forcefully recruiting Rohingya young men and boys, now also expanded to young women in order to fight for them. Both the junta and the Arakan army are doing this and use Rohingya as a human shield. And today there are less than 15% of Rohingya left inside our own ancestral homeland. There are 3 million Rohingya worldwide. Only 1% of us have documentation. 1%. 99% of us don't, and are continuing to live in displacement and extreme poverty.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Rohingya is not the only ethnic group that got massacred in Myanmar, right?
No, we are not. But we are almost the litmus test to how far the military junta has gotten with oppressing and persecuting people. We are the test group, or the guinea pig in this case. And this is, the Chin, the Shan community, the various other groups. Not to say that the crimes against them were not heinous or grave at all, but for the Rohingya, because we do not have this self-protection mechanism, because we laid down the arms very long time ago when General Aung San came to the Rohingya leaders and asked, please lay down your arms so we can unify the country. We did. Okay. But what happened is this. We do not have anyone to protect us. Yeah.
Because about last year, I went to Chiang Rai.
Oh, okay.
I went to the Karen Longneck village.
Yes.
I'm surprised that they are from Myanmar. They are not Thai.
Yeah.
They got repressed in Myanmar. They ran away to Chiang Rai, to Thailand, and they have no nationality now.
Yeah. I think a matter of the ethnic groups living along the Thai-Burma border is a very interesting one. Sometimes both of the countries would deny access to citizenship, even though those people might actually be in their border. And that's actually the what is it called, the passing the torch or whatever game that there is, that both governments do everything possible for them to not be responsible for people.
Yeah. And what makes me sad most is when I was there, at one moment I feels like, is it human zoo, because we pay to see how they live, how they work.
Yeah.
And then, is it human zoo? It's sad.
The territory under...
No, the long neck women.
Yeah.
The territory under the Myanmar government or...
Udah masuknya Chiang Rai.
Oh,
Ada Chiang Rai itu kan Thailand.
Thailand,
kan?
Okay.
It's about, if we walk north, it's about 30 minutes walk to go to reach the Myanmar border.
Okay.
But they have no nationality.
It's a contested area. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's true that a lot of people, and Myanmar might have actually produced the most stateless communities. But unfortunately, without the stability, without the Myanmar military out of the fold of politics and social life within Burma, Myanmar, and out of the military control, we will not be able to establish peace within the country or provide any kind of access to citizenship or any kind of reparations to these groups that have been marginalized to this extent.
Yeah. So it feels like the junta in Myanmar, they just want to wipe out everyone except them.
You know what? You're right. In a sense, I think the part of the reason why the military junta want to drive the Rohingya out and also keep some of us for human shield, for other slave labor, for other purposes that are really, really so violent, is because prior to around 2011 and 12 was the time that there was an exploratory a project of the natural gas field, and that became the Shui gas project, right just off the coast of Rakhine state. And that was a collaboration between POSCO, or Daewoo International at that time, South Korean company, and it was also the Riverside company, which belonged to Australia. There's a few other companies that are implicated in this, but the exploration project was that belonged to South Korea, with the Myanmar military's permission. And that actually resulted in years and years and years of divide and conquer tactic, rumors that were actually started to divide Rakhine community and Rohingya community. And eventually what happened is the land were dispossessed from Rohingya and Rakhine people to build pipelines. And to clear the area for the deep sea port that's called Jokpyu Deep Sea Port. You know when it was finished, the deep sea port? 2018, January. What happened in 2017? The Rohingya were driven out in the massive number, nearly 1 million people. And those villages that were the path for pipelines to go up to China was actually the areas that Rohingya villages were burned, razed, and bulldozed. There's no remnants of Rohingya living there anymore. So if we actually ever get to go back home, we are disoriented because we don't know where our homes are anymore. That's the level of destruction that this military junta has done to this country, just to the Rohingya.
Ada nuansa bisnisnya.
Iya ternyata. Cina tuh malah. Aduh. Chris. How is Aung San Suu Kyi now?
She's sick. I know her son. Her son is living in London with his wife. And he has become more active recently because his mother was, to start with, her lawyers had access to her, and we would get news occasionally of how she was. And there have been, since last year or so, rumors about her health. There are rumors about, is she in a small private sort of area like a house within a prison, or is she in a prison cell? There have been rumors that she would be moved to house arrest. She spent many years of her life under house arrest. And I think the key thing now is we've got this new administration, call it what you will. One of the big question marks hanging over this is, should they let her out? In the new political dispensation, the last thing that the generals want is to create a martyr. So if Aung San Suu Kyi dies in prison, house arrest, wherever she is, she will become a martyr. And she will become a greater focal point for resistance, for anti-government movement, and all of that. Now, it's interesting, at moments of big decisions about what to do, traditionally the army begins to split, because there'll be some generals who are, reformists. There are some generals who are hardliners. There are some generals who feel she should be released. There are some generals who think she should be killed. There's a huge, massive, great spectrum of opinion about what to do with her. So, in a way, she's quite useful politically, because she will start, it will divide the army. It isn't clear what will happen, but I think they don't want her to die in prison. And I hear from Kim, her son, that she's very, very unwell. The other thing I think it's important to say about Aung San Suu Kyi, and Yasmin is a much better person to talk to about me than this, is that when in 2019 she went to the International Court of Justice and defended the government, and let's not forget, in those days, pre-coup, the government in Myanmar was civilian and military. So she was the state councillor. She was, if the 2008 illegal military constitution had not banned her from standing, she would be the leader of the country. So she went, and she, in the eyes of many people, and if you look at the transcripts, it seems pretty clear, defended the generals against allegations of genocide. So, and interestingly, when the court in Argentina, where there's a Rohingya case, issued arrest warrants, one of the people they issued arrest warrants for was Aung San Suu Kyi. And I said at the time they should release her so she can go and stand trial in Argentina. Release her from prison. Let accountability, run its course. So she's a controversial. But I sort of sense from your, how is Aung San Suu Kyi? It's like, how is Nelson Mandela? She is not viewed as the Nelson Mandela of Myanmar. Okay. She's been disowned by many of the Nobel laureates, and I think that history will judge her very harshly, and history will look back and say, well, her legacy wasn't as this great bequeather of human rights and democracy. She was a woman who made some very stark political choices, and they weren't all choices which were in the favour of the Rohingya people. I mean, Yasmin, what do you think about Aung San Suu Kyi? A powerful Burmese woman assesses another powerful Burmese woman.
Well, I actually met her in the court, in the ICJ, at the International Court of Justice. We were sitting on the opposite side because I was sitting with the Council of the Gambia, who brought the case of the suspicion of genocide against the state of Myanmar. Yeah. And she was there representing the state of Myanmar. Yeah. But at the same time, she refused to say the word Rohingya. Her bodyguards were staring us down from the opposite side of the aisle, not looking at the judge, but looking here and looking at us like this, like eyeing us up and down and following us around inside the court compound. And I was with 3 genocide survivors of the 2017 operation. And we happened to bump into her during the recess. Okay. And of course, we were hearing all of these. She knew who we were. We were sitting right behind the council. She looked at us, she looked our way because we were walking this direction, and she decided, she saw us and she turned right away, her nose up high in the air. She just did not think that we were, I assume that she didn't think we were worth her time. But at the same time, she also refused to actually acknowledge anything about the Rohingya, and she calls it the Muslim issues. That there are so many sides to this, that both sides need to come together. And this is a very, very peculiar language because it mimics what the military junta says all the time. But there's too many sides for us to decide, and all of us needs to come together, and let's make friendship bracelet, and let's get over all of this. When it comes to killing and annihilation of a community, maybe we can't make friends.
There's one important thing also to say about Aung San Suu Kyi. One of the big ethnic divides in Myanmar is the Bama, which is 40% of the population of the mainstream. The word Burmese, comes from this group, the Bama, and then there's all the other ones. And, whether you're military or civilian, from the perspective of many of what we call the ethnic nationalities, like the Rohingya, it's seen as a Bama plot. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or you're a military, there's a Bama establishment, there's a Bama hierarchy, and they have closed ranks together in order to subjugate the ethnic nationalities. And Aung San Suu Kyi's appearance at the court was seen very much through that lens, the Bama majority closing ranks and standing together to maintain their supremacy over the rest of Burma. There's a very interesting story. I used to be a reporter at the BBC. I say to Yasmin, I'm a recovering journalist. And there was a famous occasion when the BBC sent someone to Aung San Suu Kyi to interview her. Yeah. Her name was Michelle Hussein, and she's a big shot anchor. She's a brilliant journalist. She's left the BBC now. And she went, and they put a body mic on Aung San Suu Kyi and turned it on. So a body mic, you can walk around, and everything you say gets heard. And there was a break. And she went to see her advisors in a back room, but her mic was turned on. And she said, "Can you believe it? The BBC has sent a Muslim to interview me."
That's a really famous video.
It was a famous thing. And that, I think, gave a real insight into her attitude towards Muslims, towards the Rohingya. It's like, if you really want to have an insight into a moment of revelation and truth about the attitude of Aung San Suu Kyi and many of the Bama establishment, there's this patronizing, racist, disgraceful view of the Muslims, Rohingya, and other nationalities, actually.
Okay, that's shocking.
It is. Truly shocking.
Tidak menyangka saya, Bang, ternyata beliau.
Itu Aung San Suu Kyi itu peristiwa yang paling mengejutkan banyak orang. Karena orang berpikir dia adalah aktivis demokrasi yang di wilayah ASEAN adalah pejuang penting. Tiba-tiba keluar video itu, dan dia pernyataan dia soal itu selalu muncul bahwa menunjukkan sikap anti muslimnya dan lain-lain.
Sorry to disillusion you, my friend. Sorry to disillusion you.
That's just like the most diplomatic of the racist that we have seen.
Yeah, really.
She's diplomatic, but when we talk about ethno-nationalism or what the real root cause of all of this is that people from the Burma community are actually propped up against everyone else in the country. They have access to power, access to political control, and access to social, basically they dictate what the rest of the country should do. And to ethnic communities who have had to change their name to sound more Burma throughout many, many years in order for them to have any proximity to power or any proximity to the control of their own life, because they get discriminated at the very official level, right down to very, very social life that they live. It's an interesting dynamic where the entire country focuses on one identity to be the correct one, and that was actually framed in 1962 when the coup was thrown. When the first coup happened, the Burma Buddhist population, the nationalist Buddhist, have decided that there is only one correct way to be a Burmese, which is you have to be Buddhist and you have to be Burma, and potentially you have to be a man as well. And that's just how many layers we go. But Wiratu, the monk that actually preached violence against Rohingya, he calls us African carp. He calls us too dark and too black. We have the same skin tone, just so you know. But he calls us too black, too dark, too blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, that kind of rhetoric was actually borrowed from the war on terror by the American, the Islamophobia that was, so prevalent throughout the West, was actually used in order to prop up the Buddhist nationalist agenda. And he was using it so successfully that he was able to actually justify an entire genocide, because he also learned it from his friends in Sri Lanka against the Tamil. So this goes beyond just one nation being, really bad people. Perpetrators learn from each other.
And by the way, everyone learnt from British colonialism.
Yes.
Can I just say, full disclosure, I'm only half. So my mum, my late departed mother, was British. My dad was Indian. So I'm a bit kind of, halfway house on this issue. But basically, when Britain left Myanmar, Burma as it then was, it said, first of all, it only, in the talks about disengaging, it talked to the most powerful people. So you were automatically empowering the army, and they left behind, in what was called the Panglong Conference, a group of ethnic nationalities they were prepared to talk to, and it didn't include the Rohingya. It didn't include quite a lot of people, but it didn't. In other words, Britain empowered the army, which is now persecuting, doing a genocide against the Rohingya. It also disempowered the Rohingya and effectively said, you're not a nationality which we're going to recognise in our departure. And guess what? In the 1982 citizenship law, the Burmese military carried through that legacy from the British and effectively made the Rohingya stateless. So colonialism is always evil. I include Indonesian colonialism in that, by the way. And we have to recognise that, yes, what Yasmin says is absolutely right. There is, dictatorships learn from each other. Historically, that's the case. But a lot of it goes back to colonialism, and quite honestly, it goes back to British colonialism.
Ya benar sih. Kan waktu mereka mau merdeka Myanmar, ketika mereka lagi merumuskan, kan semua etnik grup diundang, kecuali Rohingya kan. Emang dari awal
sudah diskriminatif. Dan itu yang mau diperjuangkan sekarang, dan apa yang terjadi dengan Aung San Suu Kyi adalah imbas dari itu semua ketika dia bersikap Islamofobia, lalu kemudian berrelasi dengan rezim militer, yang lahir adalah rezim otoriter baru kan, dan dia merasakan dampaknya dari keburukan itu. Jadi penjajahan buruk, otoritarian juga buruk, dan itu berdampak bagi banyak orang.
Seriously, Yasmin, I thought Aung San Suu Kyi is the hope that Myanmar needed.
Yasmin is the hope. Yasmin is the hope.
No, you
10
know
or
what?
15 years ago.
You are not the only one. My father was a fan of hers.
Okay.
He went to one of her rallies leading up to the time before the election, before she was thrown into house arrest. She was our hope.
Yes, yes.
She was
She
actually
was,
very
yeah.
well respected. But of course, anyone who gets too high falls down very quickly. But I think that her principle was never actually there from the get-go. She was never really fighting for everybody.
Yeah.
She was just seen too quickly to be the savior. Instead, I think all of us here understand that we cannot pin hopes into one person.
That's true.
Personalizing a hero, a victor, is never the real agenda or a real tactic for liberation. It has to be a collective effort, and I think we're here in Indonesia today. Thanks to Chris and thanks to Themis in Indonesia, especially Ferry, is because we're actually doing a collective work in order to hold the Myanmar military accountable. It has to start from Indonesia because maybe this is the best place for it to happen.
Ini kesempatan mengulang sejarah sebenarnya ketika bapak bangsa kita dengan konferensi Asia Afrika dan Dasasila Bandung bicara soal kemerdekaan banyak negara di Asia dan Afrika. Dan ini cerita, ayo kita mulai dari Jakarta karena sekretariat ASEAN ada di Jakarta dan mari kita lakukan sesuatu untuk banyak orang termasuk Myanmar. Jadi ada aspek bersejarah yang sangat penting ya.
Bisa dibilang ini momennya di tangan kita.
Salah satu momen.
Salah satu momen yang dihabis.
Tadi pagi Pak Marzuki Darusman menyampaikan ke Kejaksaan Agung bahwa ini adalah satu langkah raksasa, a giant step for human rights things. Jadi ini penting kalau jaksa melakukan sesuatu, orang akan terkesima dengan cara berpikir Indonesia yang melindungi kawasannya, yang bicara soal kemanusiaan. Coba bayangkan orang selalu bicara soal jauh sekali di Palestina tapi lupa di Myanmar juga terjadi pembantaian. Kami pernah menulis buku soal apa yang terjadi di Myanmar dan kaitannya dengan Indonesia. Dan kami mau mengatakan bahwa dalam perspektif Islam ada prinsip bahwa satu tubuh yang terluka itu tubuh yang lain merasakan. Begitu juga perasaan orang Indonesia dan orang Rohingya itu satu kesatuan karena dia Muslim Brotherhood. Tapi di titik tertentu lebih besar dari itu adalah ASEAN Brotherhood, bahwa orang ASEAN ketika dilukai mestinya orang ASEAN lain juga merasakan hal yang sama. Nah ini yang kita mau lakukan di Jakarta ya. Ini bisa jadi prinsip Jakarta berikutnya untuk perlindungan hak asasi manusia. Jadi Pak Presiden harusnya bangga,
sejujurnya
karena
saya tidak menyangka ini sebesar ini loh. Wow. Tapi setelah laporan ini, next prosesnya apa lagi Bang? Kira-kira?
Ya memang agak ada tantangan seperti biasa lah ya. Bahwa ini KUHP baru, bahwa tidak semua aparat penegak hukum paham dengan ketentuan KUHP baru dengan azas universalitasnya yang harusnya bicara perlindungan hak asasi manusia ya. Dan itu memang butuh waktu untuk mereka menyadari ini pasal penting. Tapi tadi pertemuan itu karena itu adalah pejabat kejaksaan dengan Pak Marzuki Darusman juga adalah mantan Jaksa Agung Republik Indonesia. Ada Pak Busromo Kodas dari Muhammadiyah yang bicara ini betapa penting untuk kita lakukan. Dan mudah-mudahan mereka akan melakukan tinjauan. Kan kita melakukan penelitian penelitian kita cukup panjang yang bicara soal kejahatan ini dan potensi yang bisa dilakukan. Dan harusnya ini akan bisa dengan mudah kalau niatnya mudah Kan ya itu makanya kita singgung. Indonesia ini kan presiden Dewan HAM PBB. Buktinya apa? Nah ini kita pakai pasal ini kesempatan.
Saya bilang momennya ada di tangan
momennya
kita.
Ada di tangan kita.
Kita mau ngolah ini gimana?
Ya betul
Chris and Yasmin, I want to know what is the biggest misconception about the crisis in Myanmar?
Wow.
We got one.
for
We got one
for
about
the
Aung San Suu
ASEAN
Kyi.
things, yeah.
We got one about the Aung
No,
San Suu
they
Kyi.
got one.
Anything else?
Okay. Maybe I can go first. I think the biggest misconception about the Rohingya is that, especially within ASEAN, I think, is that the community is not resisting against the military or not trying hard to remain home. Only 15% of Rohingya are left or less inside our own homeland because of the genocidal process. But a lot of the online rhetorics that we see on my page at the Rohingya Mayafono Collaborative Network is all about how little we do to protect ourselves or to liberate ourselves from the genocidal oppression. I think Indonesians, Malaysians, Thai, and many others in Southeast Asia forget very quickly how the decolonization process went for our ancestors. They forget how much blood was spilled and how many people had died and how many people live to this day in regret because they couldn't protect their loved ones. We almost have this very strange amnesia that, genocide is a nothing issue. When in fact, a lot of Indonesian and Malaysians specifically have a lot of empathy for Palestinian and think that Palestinian are all, the be-all and all, the perfect victims and survivors of genocide. They're not perfect. Neither are we. And I think the biggest misconception here is that we are trying to find the perfect victim from everybody. If they're not perfect, they are not allowed to exist or to, continue to be seen trying. And I really hope that, through this podcast, we actually hatch out some of this misconception that Rohingya are not trying, because we are. That's why we're here.
And also, you need to tell anybody else about the misconception related with refugee in Indonesia.
That is what I want to ask.
Okay.
Why you are going too far from your country, not like Palestinian. You need to explain because it's such a really big issue.
I think people here don't understand that Palestinians are also refugees. And I'm going to leave this for Chris because Chris has worked on Palestine for a long time. But Palestinians actually are displaced everywhere. I have friends who are from Palestine who live in Libya. Grow up in Libya. That's North Africa versus Palestine. A lot of people are displaced in Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, many other countries. So are the Rohingya. We're in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and India, Aceh. Indonesia, Malaysia. Aceh is this really big population. Thailand. There's so many other places because there is not a single place in ASEAN or in the global south that is safe for Rohingya to be. Because when a state failed to protect us, no other states are stepping up to say, you know what, you can come here and stay. We'll give you resources to become upstanding citizen. The only thing that we're given in many of these cases are actually, okay, you're here for an emergency, refuge. We'll give you, but don't expect anything beyond that. Don't expect education for your children. Don't expect that you're going to get employment, even if it's a low-level jobs, even if it's low-level labor job. But you know what? The KLCC, the big tall buildings in Malaysia and in Putrajaya that are built on the backs of Rohingya labor. The exploited labor that have no protection, no legal document. Those are our people who went on to build those buildings. And Malaysians are going to get angry with us for having to stay in the country when Petronas actually poured so much money and trade with the Myanmar military. There's so many complicity here from the parties within this region. If the region has enabled the military junta to commit genocide against Rohingya, we cannot complain about the refugees that we helped create. And I think the misconception about Rohingya being lazy, too dark. Am I too dark for you, or are we the same skin shade?
No, I'm darker.
We are the same skin tone. We're both brown. That's the issue. No, but that's the issue. The issue is, the first thing you saw, and you told me, you spoke to me in Bahasa Indonesia. No one knows what the Rohingya person looks like. There's a huge misconception that we look a certain way, we are a certain way, that we are this devil. we're just human beings trying to live, trying to survive.
Soal miskonsepsi di Indonesia, misalnya buang makanan dan segala macam,
pelihara kambing di rumah, macam-macam.
Itu dari temuan kita dan teman-teman sebenarnya upaya untuk menyudutkan refugi Myanmar di Indonesia, terutama Rohingya, supaya mereka digunakan dalam banyak kepentingan termasuk bisnis slavery itu, dan itu jadi alasan pembenar ya untuk mereka tanpa disiksa, tanpa diperjualbelikan dan perdagangan, dan itu buruk sekali karena kita jangan lupa bahwa di mana-mana refugi itu punya aspek psikologis, mereka tertekan, terabaikan. Dan ketika ada upaya-upaya menyudutkan mereka akan mudah lebih marah, dan di saat itu mereka dimanfaatkan. Muncullah isu-isu yang konyol kan, orang refugi buang makanan kan hampir nggak masuk akal, Koi, tapi itu digunakan untuk jadi alasan pembenar dari. Dan itu
siapa mintanya yang lain.
Dan itu tidak benar ya. Dalam upaya itu jadi argumentasi untuk menyudutkan mereka. Masuklah bisnis, jadi perdagangan orang, jadi budak, jadi pekerja, buruh yang murah dan segala macam. Ya ini sekarang mereka dimanfaatkan, dan harus diingat kejahatan terbesar itu terjadi di laut, termasuk perdagangan orang. Dan etnis Rohingya salah satu yang kemudian diperdagangkan untuk berbagai kepentingan. Tadi contoh di Malaysia, bukan tidak mungkin terjadi di Indonesia.
Iya. Itu ya, jadi buat teman-teman yang suka jangan terima Rohingya, mereka pemalas, kemakan semua kisah-kisah itu. Bang Ferry sudah ada studinya.
Itu orang semua tuh, Koi. Itu aspek manusiawinya harus kita kedepankan.
Iya. Berarti nextnya akan menunggu berapa lama nih Bang kira-kira?
Tidak lama, saya dan Chris dan Yasmin serta Pak Marzuki Darusman, Pak Busro dan teman-teman yang ada Eka Anas, The Brandals, ada Mbak Wanda Hamidah, ada ahli kita Mbak Bivitri Susanti, ada Mas Arif Aryono, sudah bicara untuk tindak lanjut, salah satunya untuk agar pasal-pasal universal jurisdiction ini betul-betul dipahami oleh penegak hukum, dan berupaya mendekati presiden dan istana agar kemudian tampil paling depan untuk misi kemanusiaan ini. Dan kami yakin kalau presiden memanfaatkan ini, banyak orang akan acungkan jempol. Daripada bicara perdebatan banyak hal di luar negeri. Sekarang tetangga terdekat loh yang perlu diselamatkan gitu ya.
Oke, Chris. How about you? About the misconception?
I thought Yasmin spoke so beautifully about the huge. She gave a real anatomy of the misconceptions.
I just continue what her talking about misconception, especially about refugee in Aceh and Medan and Riau.
I mean, Burma, Myanmar is the land of false narratives, of fake news, of manufactured misconceptions, propaganda. And the Rohingya, I think, are the archetypal victims of all of that confluence of crap that that get the establishment, the military establishment in particular, the Burma establishment, lets flood across. But I would like to choose one, misconception in particular, because I think it's relevant to regional audiences and audiences in Indonesia. And that is the misconception that the ASEAN principle of non-intervention will somehow produce stability, development, prosperity. It will solve the conflict. It will address the fundamental underlying issues of a place like Myanmar. And I think, that is the biggest and most damaging misconception that ASEAN leaders have sort of spread around the place. And the reason I say it's the most damaging misconception is because from that misconception after the coup came this ridiculous notion of the 5-point consensus, which essentially is end the violence, talk to all parties in political dialogue. It became very clear straight away, in spite of the fact that ASEAN has repeated it time and time again, throughout the period since the coup, the Myanmar army has shown that it is prepared to escalate violence to the point where there have been massive airstrikes in which thousands of people have been killed. They have said time and time again that they will not do dialogue with Aung San Suu Kyi, with lots of other groups. We heard from a source recently who'd been talking to the foreign ministry here in Jakarta, and what he said was the foreign minister of Jakarta thinks that it should go in and start promoting dialogue, talking to the junta, you know, and what we heard was that the junta's position is that their precondition is that these people coming to do dialogue must respect the 2008 constitution. The 2008 constitution gives the military a quarter of the seats in parliament. In other words, the military are not interested either in non-violence and they're not interested in power-sharing talks at all. And yet ASEAN continues with this delusion, this self-inflicted delusion that somehow, you know, this process is going to produce stability, peace, development, all the things which the founding ASEAN Charter was about. And our answer, and partly why we're here in Jakarta, and why I'm so proud to have worked with Ferry, and why I think, you know, Yasmin has been this extraordinary, inspirational, rain-making force for change, is because you cannot have a society which allows war criminals to become the president. You cannot have a society further down the command chain where people who've committed atrocity crimes against individuals at the sort of local level are allowed to walk free. That will never be a stable society. There has to be some form of accountability. Now, accountability is up to people. It's up to the local people. After the Cold War, you had Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. You had, you know, criminal tribunals where they said, let's get the bastards. Truth and Reconciliation was, let's let everyone talk and we'll get the truth out. And there are different models for transitional justice in between. So, you know, accountability can take many forms. But mark my words, my friend, without accountability, neither Myanmar nor the ASEAN region will be stable. It won't be free. It won't be economically prosperous. All the things which the ASEAN Charter sets out to do. And all of that is based on this ridiculous delusion that the policy of non-intervention is something they should follow. We say, no, that's not true. And the place to start is accountability. That's why we say, please give our case a chance.
That's true. Salah satu hal menarik yang berkaitan dengan orang Indonesia yang dibicarakan Chris adalah soal sampah kepalsuan itu. Kalau Koi ingat waktu buang-buang nasi itu tiba-tiba banyak muncul buzzer komen. Bener. Tahu nggak, data yang menarik dari Yasmin adalah kebanyakan skenarionya itu sama dengan bunyi-bunyian yang muncul di Malaysia juga, dan berkaitan dengan semua apa yang dibicarakan junta. Jadi kemungkinan itu buzzer berbayar untuk menyudah.
Itu kan alatnya junta Myanmar ya.
Yes.
Wah, karena orang Rohingya jorok, makanya kita harus ngebuang mereka.
Sehingga diperbolehkanlah mereka diperbudak, mereka kemudian dibunuh karena upaya-upaya pemalsuan itu.
Iya. So,
what was your last point? It sounded so interesting.
Well, you just mentioned about a crap of fact in many issues related with
Myanmar is like an information black hole where
but
anyone can say anything and
false information.
But
it's a big black hole of
I
false
put
information.
the relationship with Indonesian situation in seeing refugee of Rohingya.
Yes.
Yasmin just told us this afternoon that the scenario of narrative actually coming from the junta itself in Malaysia and Indonesia is it put a perspective that we allow us probably to kill them, to punish them, to slave them. So that's really scenario coming from the junta.
It's the same.
So hate speech is always the precursors to mass atrocity and genocide. In the case of the Rohingya, the junta benefits from hate speech against Rohingya across Southeast Asia. Why? Because it downplays the suffering of the Rohingya, and it downplays the attempts, any attempts at all, to hold them accountable. So what happens in a region that does not see victims as human? We don't ever do anything to hold the perpetrators or the criminals accountable, and they get to do whatever they want. And that's actually one thing that I think is also important to speak in Indonesia is hate speech against Rohingya brings democratic backsliding. And it's not going to stop. It's not going to end with Rohingya when hate speech starts. It will end with something else unraveling terrible, terrible things that can unravel in this country. And I think that we've seen a snippet of that during the previous protest just last year, where the Grab driver, or I think the Gojek driver, was ran over by the police. We're talking about that kind of impunity.
Yeah.
Look at Indonesia in 1965. Folks, I hate to say this, but one of the great drivers of that mass atrocity was misinformation. And I have to say that the impunity which followed from that has not made Indonesia a particularly stable country. Discuss.
Can I just do a shameless plug here? Yeah. There's a film that our group has actually produced. It's called Resisting Hate, and I can send the link to you guys later. But it's on YouTube, 23 minutes long. It compares side by side the hate speech against Rohingya from 2017 in Myanmar and the ones that are proliferating in this region since 2023.
Yeah. Just send the link to me. I
Will
will
do.
put it in the description.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So guys, last one. Do you guys agree if I say that Myanmar has the same urgency as Gaza?
Yes.
I mean,
in my perspective, yes.
Yeah.
Indonesia
After this talk,
yes.
I think about it.
Yeah.
I think Yasmin should end.
From a perspective of a survivor, there's no question about it. There's no doubt that we need to treat all genocide with the same urgency. Not just Rohingya, not just Uyghur, not just Congo, not just Sudan. There are, by the UN standard, there are 9 active genocide currently. I think it's important for all of us to actually do our own research. Yes, we might be able to only spend time and effort in one cause, but I do think, especially because this is Indonesia, we must pay attention to the ones that are actually happening in our region and try to end it, because our governments, the people around us, are probably implicated.
So there are 9 active genocide.
That's just the one that's recorded by the UN.
Yeah.
And then the other important thing to say, and I agree, you shouldn't have a hierarchy of suffering. I don't think it's a very useful moral principle to say that some people's suffering is worse than others, because that's racism. So that's a very difficult moral road, philosophical road to go down. But I think what I can say and what we must say is what Yasmin is saying, which is that crimes committed of this sort are crimes against all of us, and therefore we have a particular obligation to deal with them. Countries in this region have an additional issue, which is that the atrocity crimes being committed against the Rohingya and other people, other civilian populations inside Myanmar, have a direct regional implication, which Indonesian taxpayers, there is a refugee problem of which the Rohingya are a part, a very significant part. There are scam centres in Myanmar which are leading to Indonesians and people across this region being enslaved. There are human trafficking gangs. Of course, the Rohingyas are being press ganged and into labour or whatever. There are drug issues. There are all these regional issues that are the direct result of the policies of the Myanmar junta and the lack of accountability, the impunity which they enjoy. So, yes, I agree entirely with Yasmin and Ferry. There cannot be a hierarchy of suffering. All genocides are as important as all other genocides. They all have to be dealt with. But there is a particular responsibility with ASEAN nations to deal with what's happening in Myanmar, particularly the Rohingya.
Yeah.
Kayak tanggung jawab ke tetangga lah.
Iya,
tetangga itu kalau dia kebanjiran, masa kita tolong lebih dulu yang jauh kan? Walaupun perasaan kita ingin membantu karena penderitaan mereka sama, tapi yang tetangga lebih duluan dong.
And I think what happened to Rohingya is not about religion, it's humanity.
It
because
isn't.
Not all Rohingya are Muslim, right?
Not all of us are Muslim, There are some of us who are Buddhist, some of us who are Christian, very small number, some of us who are Hindu, because that's actually the prior religion of Rohingya.
And some secular was used.
Some who are atheists now.
Okay. Itu yang mau gue ingetin. Jadi masalah Rohingya itu bukan jangan bukan Muslim, itu masalah agama doang, enggak. Banyak juga yang di yang di bazar yang di Bangladesh tuh yang besar tuh. Itu kan yang non muslimnya juga banyak tuh, yang penampungan orang Rohingya terbesar di dunia tuh.
The biggest what we call
displaced.
Displaced.
Is it in Bangladesh, right?
Yes, 1.4 million people are there.
That one.
what we call the
Fox
name?
Bazar.
Cox's Bazar. Cox's Bazar.
Cox's Bazar.
Cox's Bazar refugee camps. Yeah.
Ya. Jadi itu, dan ternyata tanggung jawab kita cukup berat.
Sebagai sebuah negara ya.
Iya. So I think that's all. It's
Thank
been more than 1 hour.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're
for
such a
having
good
us.
host.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
It's
Thank
an honor
you so
for me.
much.
You know, Chris, I've seen many of your interview videos before
Ah.
about Rohingya, about Myanmar, about Gaza. It's in Al Jazeera, TRT World. So when Bang Ferry told me that you're gonna come here, I was like, oh, this is the man.
Well, I hope I'm not disappointed.
Man of the hour.
No, it's not.
Celebrity.
Can I say
It's not.
Yasmin must be, you know, she is the star of the show. I mean, Ferry, we're supporting acts.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
one of the things which I say time and time again in the work that
Yeah.
MAP does is that we work to put the survivors of these terrible crimes of genocide and crimes against humanity and war crimes at the center of everything we do. Because if at the end of the day, the Indonesian government rejects our case, Yasmin would have come and she would have spoken her truths, she would have validated her narratives, she would have moved.
That's okay, Chris.
From being a victim to being a survivor.
Yeah.
That's really important.
Yasmin.
Despite the struggles, despite everything that we've had to go through, I love this region.
Yeah.
And that's why I keep coming back. I want to make it better.
Yeah. Okay.
I want it to be free of genocide.
Yeah. Amin.
That's good.
Amin. I think that's all. Kita punya tanggung jawab di sini. Semoga bisa nextnya makin progresnya makin oke ya Bang ya.
Amin.
Oke. Once again, thank you, Chris.
Makasih.
Yasmin.
Makasih
Bang Ferry,
banyak.
makasih banget Bang Ferry. Oke, kalau gitu, kalau lu mungkin setelah nonton ini lu ada perubahan pandangan tentang apa yang terjadi di Myanmar, boleh lu komen, atau lu punya solusi-solusi lain mungkin jangka pendek, jangka panjang yang lu kepikiran, boleh juga lu komen. Siapa tahu nanti Bang Ferry ngeliat kan, bisa dipakai juga. Oke, kalau gitu, thank you, jangan lupa like, comment, subscribe. Bye.